My stepdad demanded rent when I turned 19, but he had no idea I owned the house until I dropped the truth that shut him down. I was hunched over my statistics homework, wrestling with probability equations that seemed determined to make my brain hurt, when someone pounded on my bedroom door. Not Mom's gentle knock that usually came with hot chocolate and encouragement, but the aggressive bang that meant trouble was brewing. I just turned 19 2 days ago, and my stepdad Brad had been throwing around words like responsibility and real world all week like they were weapons. "Yeah, come in," I called out, not bothering to look up from my calculator. Brad pushed through the door, his massive frame filling the doorway. He still wore his orange safety vest from the construction site, work boots tracking mud across my cream carpet. The smell of concrete dust and diesel fuel followed him like a cloud. "Ellie, we need to have a serious talk." He didn't wait for permission before plopping down on my desk chair, making it creak under his weight. "You're 19 now. Old enough to vote, old enough to serve your country, old enough to pay your own way." I set down my pencil and turned to face him, already knowing where this was headed. "Pay my way how, exactly?" "Rent." The word dropped between us like a hammer. $600 a month. That covers your room, utilities, food, the works. Your mom and I have been discussing it, and we agree it's time you learned how the adult world operates. My chest tightened. $600. I barely scraped together $450 a month working part-time at Romano's Pizza, slinging pepperoni slices to college kids and truckers passing through town. "Brad, I'm still in college. I'm trying to save money for my senior year tuition." He let out a bark of laughter that had no humor in it. "Sweetheart, look around you. Your mother's pulling overtime at the nursing home just to keep food on this table. College is a nice dream, but dreams don't pay bills. Time to wake up and smell the coffee." I stared at this man who'd swept into our lives 4 years ago with his toolbox and his big plans. Our 2-story house on Maple Street had been in my family for generations. The place where I'd learned to ride my bike, where Mom had read me bedtime stories, where Grandpa Joe had taught me to play poker on rainy Sunday afternoons. Brad had moved in like he owned the place, rearranging our furniture and our lives to suit his preferences. "What happens if I can't come up with the money?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. His smile was ice cold. "Then you figure out somewhere else to live. It's really that simple, kiddo." After he stomped back downstairs, I sat in my darkening room, listening to him tell Mom about our productive conversation in that patronizing tone he used when he thought he'd won an argument. Through my window, I could see the ancient oak tree Grandpa Joe had planted when Mom was little, its branches now reaching toward the second-story windows he'd installed with his own hands. That's when I remembered the manila envelope, the one Grandpa Joe had pressed into my hands right before he passed away, with strict instructions not to open it unless something terrible happened. "Only when you absolutely have to, Ellie Bear," he'd whispered, his calloused hands trembling as he placed it in mine. "And only if someone tries to take what belongs to our family." Brad thought he held all the cards. He had no clue that some games are won before the first hand is even dealt. The envelope had been hidden in my jewelry box for 5 years, buried beneath tangled necklaces and the friendship bracelets I'd made at summer camp. My hand shook as I broke the wax seal, remembering Grandpa Joe's final words, "Some fights, Ellie Bear, are won with brains, not fists." Inside were documents that made my head spin at first glance. Legal papers with official stamps, property deeds, and a handwritten note in Grandpa Joe's careful printing. "The house has been in the Ellie Marie Campbell Trust since the day you were born. Your mother knows about this, but I made her promise to let you discover it when you truly needed it. Call attorney Harrison Fletcher. He's been waiting for your call." Harrison Fletcher. I recognized the name from the brick law office downtown, the one with the brass nameplate and the American flag that always flew perfectly straight. Grandpa Joe had mentioned him before, called him a man who keeps his promises and fights for what's right. I called first thing Monday morning, skipping my morning economics class to meet with Mr. Fletcher in his wood-paneled office. He was exactly what I'd imagined, silver-haired, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the type of lawyer who still kept peppermint candies in a crystal dish for nervous clients. "Ellie," he said, rising from behind his mahogany desk when his secretary showed me in. "I've been expecting this call for 5 years. Your grandfather said you'd know when the time was right." He spread the documents across his desk like a treasure map. "This house, 1247 Maple Street, has been held in the Ellie Marie Campbell Trust since you were born. Your grandfather established it to protect the property from any future complications." Complications like Brad. Mr. Fletcher's smile was gentle but knowing. Your grandfather was a smart man. He'd lived long enough to know that not everyone who joins a family has the family's best interests at heart. The truth hit me like a physical blow. Brad had been collecting mortgage payments from Mom for 4 years, claiming they needed to split the house expenses 50-50, but there was no mortgage. The house had been paid off when Grandpa Joe inherited it from his father, and now it legally belonged to me. What does this mean exactly? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It means, Miss Campbell, that Brad has been committing fraud. He's been collecting money for a mortgage that doesn't exist on a property he has no legal right to. Furthermore, he has absolutely no authority to charge you rent in your own home. Mr. Fletcher leaned back in his leather chair. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I thought about Brad's smug expression, his threats, the way he'd made Mom work herself to exhaustion while he pocketed money that rightfully belonged to our family. I thought about all the college savings Mom had redirected to what she believed were necessary house payments. I want to teach him a lesson, I said quietly, but not the way he'd expect. Mr. Fletcher nodded with approval. Your grandfather would be proud. He always said the best justice is the kind that educates people, not just punishes them. We spent the next hour designing a plan that would expose Brad's deception while giving him an opportunity to make things right. It wouldn't be quick, real lessons never are, but it would be thorough, and it would be unforgettable. As I left his office, envelope tucked safely in my backpack, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the confidence that comes from knowing exactly where you stand. Brad thought he was teaching me about the real world. He had no idea how real things were about to become. For 4 weeks, I played the perfect victim. I picked up double shifts at Romano's Pizza, coming home exhausted with tomato sauce under my fingernails and the smell of mozzarella in my hair. I made a dramatic show of counting crumpled dollar bills at the kitchen table, sighing loudly when the numbers didn't add up. Only $380 this week, I'd announce, making sure my voice carried to the living room where Brad sat in his recliner watching ESPN. Mr. Romano says business is slow since the highway construction started. I don't know how I'm going to make rent. Brad would grunt from behind his beer bottle, occasionally offering unsolicited advice about working smarter, not harder, and the importance of financial discipline. Mom would give me sympathetic looks, sometimes slipping me a 20 when Brad wasn't looking, whispering apologies I pretended to desperately need. The act was exhausting, but essential. Mr. Fletcher had been crystal clear, we needed to document everything. Every fraudulent mortgage payment Brad collected from Mom. Every threat he made about eviction. Every lie he told about property taxes and home maintenance costs. Meanwhile, I was quietly building my case. I'd downloaded a recording app on my phone, capturing Brad's increasingly hostile demands about my rent payments. I photographed the fake mortgage statements he left strategically around the house, the ones showing payments to Citizens Bank for a loan that had never existed. You've got 1 week, Ellie, Brad announced on a Thursday evening, standing in the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed like a bouncer. $600, or you find somewhere else to crash. I'm done playing games. What if I can't find all the money? I asked, making my voice sound small and defeated. That's your problem to solve. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to coast through life. Mom looked heartbroken. Brad, honey, maybe we could work out some kind of payment plan. Absolutely not. His voice was final. She's old enough to work, she's old enough to pay her way. This isn't a charity, Linda. I excused myself to my room, where I immediately called Mr. Fletcher. Perfect, he said when I described the conversation. We have everything we need. Are you ready for Phase 2? Phase 2 involved my Aunt Christine, Mom's younger sister who lived in Phoenix. Christine had never trusted Brad. She'd called him a smooth-talking con artist from the very beginning, and she was more than happy to play her part in our strategy. Ellie called me sobbing. Christine told Mom over speakerphone the next evening, her voice carrying clearly through the kitchen. She says Brad is throwing her out. Linda, how can you stand by and let him do this to your own daughter? I listened from the stairway as Mom tried to defend herself, her voice strained and conflicted. He's just trying to teach her about responsibility, Christine. The bills keep piling up, and we can't afford. Can't afford what? To shelter your own child? Linda, that man has you so brainwashed, you can't see what's right in front of you. The conversation ended with Christine offering to let me live with her in Phoenix, finish college there, maybe transfer to Arizona State University. It was the perfect escape route, exactly what someone in my supposed situation would desperately need. When Mom tearfully told Brad about Christine's offer, I watched his face carefully. Instead of concern or regret, I saw something else entirely: satisfaction. That might be for the best, Brad said, not even attempting to hide his pleasure. Kid needs to learn that choices have consequences. That night, I packed a suitcase with clothes I didn't care about, leaving behind everything that truly mattered to me. Tomorrow, Brad would believe he'd achieved total victory. He had no idea that the real game was just beginning. I moved to Phoenix on a Saturday, tears streaming down my face as Brad helped load my suitcase into Christine's rental car. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. Even I almost believed I was devastated about leaving home. "You take care of yourself, kiddo," Brad said, patting my shoulder with what he probably thought was fatherly concern. "Maybe this experience will teach you to appreciate what you had here." Christine didn't speak to him directly, just gave Mom a long, emotional hug and whispered something about calling if you need anything. Then we drove away, leaving Brad standing in the driveway of what he believed was his kingdom. But I didn't actually move to Phoenix. Instead, Christine and I drove to a hotel in Springfield, 2 hours away, where Mr. Fletcher had reserved a suite under his firm's name. From there, we began the careful work of documenting Brad's next moves. The first thing he did was list my room on Craigslist. $600 per month, all utilities included, quiet neighborhood, available immediately. When potential renters called, Brad showed them around like he was the rightful owner, collecting security deposits and first month's rent from multiple people. Mr. Fletcher had hired a private investigator named Carlos Martinez, a former police detective who specialized in financial crimes. Martinez posed as a community college student looking for affordable housing, complete with fake references and a prepared story about transferring from California. "This guy's got it down to a science," Martinez reported during one of our evening conference calls. "He's collecting deposits from multiple people, telling each one they're his top choice, then finding reasons to keep the money when they don't get the room. Classic rental fraud." But Brad's biggest mistake was what he did with Mom's money. With me gone, he convinced her that my departure meant they could finally get ahead financially. He suggested they refinance the house to pay off credit card debt, showing her official-looking paperwork from Citizens Bank. "The equity in this place is just sitting here doing nothing," he told her over dinner, his voice smooth and persuasive. "We could pull out $90,000, pay off all our debts, maybe even take that cruise to the Caribbean you've been talking about." Mom, exhausted from working overtime and emotionally drained from my departure, agreed. She signed papers Brad brought home, trusting that he'd handle all the complicated details. Of course, there was no legitimate refinancing. Brad was setting up a fraudulent loan using forged ownership documents, planning to pocket the money and disappear before anyone discovered the truth. It was a sophisticated scheme, the kind that destroyed families and left people homeless. But Brad had made one critical error: he'd assumed no one was watching. Martinez documented every meeting Brad had with his criminal associates, shady mortgage brokers who specialized in predatory lending, a crooked notary who didn't ask questions about document authenticity, even a real estate appraiser who was willing to inflate property values for the right fee. "This guy's been running variations of this scam for years," Martinez explained during one of our strategy sessions. "I ran his background check. Brad Wilson isn't even his real name. He's got outstanding warrants in 3 states, all for real estate fraud." The revelation sent ice through my veins. This wasn't just about rent money or teaching me responsibility. Brad was a career criminal who'd targeted my family specifically because we owned valuable property free and clear. He'd courted Mom, married her, and spent 4 years setting up this elaborate theft. "How long do we let this continue?" I asked Mr. Fletcher. "Until he's committed to the fraud completely," he replied. "We need him to take action that can't be undone or explained away. Right now, he could claim it was all a misunderstanding." So we waited, watching Brad dig himself deeper into a hole he didn't know existed. Every day, he grew more confident, more reckless. He bought expensive clothes, talked about trading in his pickup truck for something flashier, even researched vacation packages to Mexico. He thought he'd played the perfect con. What he didn't realize was that the house always wins, especially when the house belongs to someone else entirely. The mortgage closing was scheduled for Tuesday morning at Citizens Bank. Brad had spent weeks preparing, coaching Mom on what to say, rehearsing answers to potential questions. He'd even bought a new suit for the occasion, charcoal grey with a blue tie that made him look almost legitimate. What Brad didn't know was that Citizens Bank had been cooperating with our investigation for over a week. Mr. Fletcher had contacted their fraud department, providing evidence of Brad's scheme. They'd agreed to let the closing proceed just far enough to gather definitive proof of criminal intent. I watched from a coffee shop across the street as Brad and Mom walked into the bank that morning. Mom looked anxious, gripping Brad's arm like a lifeline. Brad looked like a man who'd already spent the money in his imagination. The closing lasted exactly 18 minutes. I knew because Martinez was inside, posing as a loan processor. He later described the moment when everything collapsed. Brad had just finished signing the final documents when the bank manager entered the conference room, accompanied by 2 detectives from the County Fraud Division. "Mr. Wilson," the manager said, his voice professionally neutral, "we need to discuss some discrepancies in your loan application." Brad, according to Martinez, went pale but kept his composure. "What kind of discrepancies?" "The kind where you don't actually own the property you're attempting to mortgage." The room exploded. Mom started sobbing. Brad started yelling about mix-ups and bureaucratic errors, while the loan officer calmly explained that they discovered the house belonged to a trust, not to Brad, or even to Mom. "This is insane," Brad protested. "I've been paying the mortgage on this place for 4 years. I have documentation." "You have fraudulent documents," Detective Williams interrupted. "We've been investigating your operation for weeks, Mr. Wilson. Or should I say, Mr. Bradley Thompson." That's when Brad knew he was caught. His real name, his criminal history, his entire web of lies, it all came crashing down in that sterile conference room with its artificial plants and motivational posters about achieving home ownership dreams. Mom, still crying, asked the question that broke my heart. "I don't understand. If Brad doesn't own the house, and I don't own the house, then who does?" Detective Williams smiled gently. "Why don't we call the actual owner and ask her to join us here?" The phone call was brief. "Ellie, it's time." I walked across the street and through the bank's glass doors, my heart pounding but my steps confident. The lobby was filled with normal Tuesday morning activity, people depositing paychecks, elderly couples discussing retirement plans, a young family opening their first checking account. When I entered the conference room, the silence was deafening. Mom's mascara had created dark streaks down her cheeks. Brad sat hunched in his chair, handcuffs already around his wrists, staring at me like I was a supernatural apparition. "Hello, Brad," I said quietly. "I believe you wanted to discuss rent." The look on Brad's face was worth every sleepless night, every moment of uncertainty, every tear I'd shed over the past month. It was the expression of a predator realizing he'd been outmaneuvered by someone he'd consistently underestimated. "Ellie," Mom whispered, "I don't understand. How are you here? How do you own?" "Grandpa Joe left me the house in trust," I explained, pulling out the legal documents Mr. Fletcher had prepared. "It's been mine since I was born." Brad knew that, or should have known, if he'd done any legitimate research before targeting our family. Brad finally found his voice. "You scheming little," he struggled against the handcuffs. "You set me up. This whole thing was an elaborate setup." "No," I corrected. "You set yourself up. I just gave you enough rope to hang yourself with." The aftermath was swift and brutal. Brad, whose real name was Bradley Thompson, was charged with mortgage fraud, identity theft, and operating a criminal enterprise. The prosecutor explained that this wasn't his first offense. He'd been running similar cons across the Midwest for years, targeting single mothers and widows who owned valuable property. Mom was cleared of any criminal liability once investigators realized she'd been a victim, not an accomplice. But the emotional damage was harder to measure. She'd spent 4 years believing she was barely keeping our family financially afloat, working herself to the bone to pay a mortgage that didn't exist, while her husband pocketed thousands of dollars meant for our household expenses. "I feel so incredibly stupid," she said one evening as we sat in our living room, truly our living room, for the first time in years. "How did I not see it? How did I let him manipulate me so completely?" "Because you trusted someone you loved," I replied. "That's not stupid, Mom. That's human." The financial recovery took months. Mr. Fletcher helped us trace the money Brad had stolen, nearly $75,000 over 4 years, including the fake mortgage payments, my rent money, and various other expenses he convinced Mom were necessary. Some of it was recoverable from accounts Brad hadn't emptied yet. The rest would have to come from civil litigation that might take years to resolve. But the house was secure, more than secure. It was finally, legally, undeniably ours. I decided not to rush back to college immediately. Instead, I took a gap year working with Mr. Fletcher's firm, helping other families who'd been victimized by similar schemes. "You have a natural talent for this," he told me during one of our weekly case reviews. "The ability to see patterns, to think strategically, to stay calm under pressure. Have you considered law school?" I had, actually, but first I wanted to understand the business side of property management and real estate. Grandpa Joe had left me more than just the house. There were rental properties I'd never known about, investments that had been quietly growing for years. The trust was worth nearly $950,000, enough to pay for law school and graduate school without accumulating debt. Brad's sentencing hearing was scheduled for early summer. I planned to attend, not for revenge, but for closure. Martinez, who'd become something of a family friend, warned me that Brad might try to contact me beforehand. Criminals sometimes attempted to manipulate their victims into requesting leniency. Sure enough, a week before the hearing, I received a letter in the mail. Brad's handwriting was cramped and desperate. "Ellie, I know you despise me, and I don't blame you, but I want you to know that I never intended for things to spiral this far out of control. I got in over my head with some dangerous people, owed money I couldn't possibly pay back. When I met your mom, I thought maybe I could just borrow against the house, pay off my debts, and everything would work out fine. I never planned to destroy your family." The letter continued for 4 pages, a mixture of apologies, excuses, and thinly disguised requests for mercy. At the end, he'd written, "You're brilliant, Ellie. More brilliant than I gave you credit for. I hope you use that intelligence to build something positive, not to tear people down the way I did." I read it twice, then filed it away with the other case documents. Brad was right about one thing. I was going to build something positive, but not because he'd suggested it. Because Grandpa Joe had taught me that real power comes from lifting people up, not knocking them down. 5 years later, 1247 Maple Street had been transformed into the Joseph Campbell Foundation, a non-profit organization providing temporary housing and legal assistance to women who'd been victimized by financial fraud. We could accommodate up to 10 families at a time, with each unit equipped with a small kitchen, private bathroom, and secure internet access for job searching and legal consultations. Mom had become the foundation's executive director, using her healthcare background to help residents navigate medical insurance and social services. Her experience with Brad had given her unique insight into how predators target vulnerable women, and she'd become a passionate advocate for fraud victims throughout the region. Brad had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution, money he didn't have and probably never would. But justice wasn't really about the money anymore. It was about the 43 women who'd found safety and support at the Joseph Campbell Foundation. It was about the families we'd helped rebuild their lives after financial devastation. Every morning, I walked through the halls of what had once been just our family home, now bustling with activity. Children playing in the converted playroom, women attending job skills workshops in the former dining room, support group meetings in the living room where Brad had once held court from his recliner. Sometimes I thought about that night when Brad had demanded rent from me, threatening to throw me out of what he believed was his domain. He'd seen a naive 19-year-old girl he could intimidate and exploit. He'd never bothered to look deeper, to understand the foundation of strength and love that Grandpa Joe had built into our family's legacy. Brad had demanded rent from a house he didn't own. In the end, I'd collected something far more valuable, the knowledge that home isn't just a place you inherit, it's something you create, protect, and share with others who need it most. The manila envelope that had started it all sat framed on my office wall now, next to a photo of Grandpa Joe teaching me to play poker. His final lesson had been his greatest. Sometimes the best way to win is to let your opponent think they're winning, right up until the moment you reveal your hand. And what a hand it had been.